Hello and welcome back to chapter Back to the Basics. It is now time to talk about test analysis and test design. So let's dive in. Test analysis. Mainly this translates in what is to be tested, and this is covered in the form of test conditions. This is the process of analyzing the test basis and defining test objects. Now, in case you forgot what a test basis is, then please do not forget to check the glossary from the ISTQB syllabus. But until then, please keep in mind that a test basis consists of all the documents from which the requirements of a component or system can be inferred. Test analysis also considers evaluation and review, test objectives, product risks, and the detailed measures and targets used to define the success of testing. It can be implemented in parallel or together with test design, especially within an interactive cycle. Also, it can be performed as soon as the test basis is established for that specific test level. The test conditions shaped during test analysis can be detailed or generic. You should always consider the following when assessing which way to go: level of testing versus the level of detail and quality of the test basis, system or software complexity, project and product risk, software development lifecycle, the relation between the test basis and what is to be tested and how it is to be tested, skill and know-how of the test analyst, tools used for test tracking, level of maturity of the test process within your organization, how test design will approach the work products, and the availability of project stakeholders for consultation. It is important that during test analysis we focus properly on the test conditions. These are either items or events of a component or system that could be verified by one or more tests. For example, functions, transactions, features, and so on and so forth. Please do not forget that these test conditions may specify values or variables, be generic, for example, test the payment system, or be specific, like test payment system at time X for item Z using input Y. We should now assess when to use generic and when to go into full detail for test conditions. To simplify the answer, we can look at it as follows. Detailed when we have lightweight test design, little or no formal requirements, large-scale projects, complex, and a high-risk environment. Generic, mainly for unit testing in less complex or simple projects where hierarchical relationships exist, for acceptance testing where we utilize use cases, and for projects where documentation is rigorous and very well defined. Now, what are the advantages of detailed or generic? Looking at the detailed approach, it is more flexible in relating to the test work products. We have a better and more detailed monitoring and control. We might improve defect prevention for having an assessment occurring earlier, especially for the higher test levels. It enables test design and implementation to optimize and prepare a better detailed schedule for more efficient coverage during execution, and it gives a clearer horizontal traceability within each test level. Now, when we talk about generic, the main benefits are time effectiveness, easy to maintain, and an increased reusability, especially with dynamic and data-driven projects. Once the analysis is done, it is time to transition to test design. This mainly defines how something is to be tested. So, Test design is the process of transforming general test objectives into tangible test conditions and test cases. It covers the identification of test cases by stepwise elaboration from the identified test conditions or from the test basis. The techniques used should be the ones identified as per the test strategy and/or test plan for each specific test level. And yes, it can be performed for any test level once the test conditions are identified. And, or better said, or when we have enough information available to enable the production of either low or high level test cases. Test design is more likely a separate activity following test analysis for higher test levels, and usually a joint activity during component test or component integration test. It can cover some test implementation tasks also, especially within iterative methods, and can even focus on the creation of test data in order to optimize coverage of the test conditions. Besides all this, test monitoring, control, and traceability for the test cases has to be identified at this level, either directly as per the test basis or indirectly from the test condition. It is now time to go back to our example. And let's focus on the payment system. As you remember, the system has two modules that are integrated, and we were covering 3 test levels if we look at this individual system. Looking at the component test level, we mentioned that we can manage this stage without a test plan by creating the test conditions directly. We can do this while also merging test analysis with test design, and we have decided to create generic test conditions. The main reason for this was that it is early in the development cycle, we can leverage the test basis for traceability, and as this is done by the development team, it should help us optimize the effort and time required for this stage. Monitoring and control will also be done, but it will be done via test conditions together with the methods used for monitoring and tracking the development stage. Once we move forward to component integration test, we start working based on the test plan, which is aimed to cover scope, approach, resources, schedule, and the monitoring framework. While we do this, we still keep test analysis and test design merged. As our focus is now the communication between the two modules within the system, we also took the decision to keep the test conditions generic in order to optimize time and effort spent during this phase. Finally, we have reached the system test level. Again, we create a test plan to cover scope, approach, resources, schedule, and define the monitoring framework based on which we report. But this time we do test analysis first in order to shape the test conditions and then follow up with test design to further detail those conditions into cases and detailed steps. At this stage, we decided to have detailed rather than generic test conditions and test cases in order to have a more thorough tracking, increased traceability, but also to offer us the possibility to prioritize and prepare the scope for an optimized execution coverage. With this, I'm happy to conclude this lesson on test analysis and test design, and in our next chapter, we are going to proceed with implementation and execution.